Today we're going to learn about part one of a two-part series on energy in plants, and the first part is photosynthesis. The next one will be cellular respiration, which will come in a couple days. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the photosynthesis wrap, and now every time I say that, maybe you'll get photosynthesis. Let's get into this stuck in your head. Okay, so photosynthesis. The sun is the ultimate source of energy for all living things. I think that we hopefully knew that. Okay, and a little sun here. Okay. The sun is also the source of other things like wind and our weather. So it is what plants use or need to be able to make energy for the rest of us, and also bacteria too. And it's also why we have oxygen in our atmosphere. So photosynthesis is a very important process, which is why we'll be spending the next couple days on that. I really probably should not be allowed to record videos at 8 in the morning. Okay, so let's talk about some concepts here. The fact of an autotroph, versus a heterotroph. Autotrophs are organisms that obtain food by eating other organisms. So one of the examples that I gave is a mammal, like the zebra or the lion. So we are also heterotrophs. Fungi are heterotrophs because they eat or consume decaying organisms. And a lot of bacteria are heterotrophs, some are not. Okay? And a lot of protists are also heterotrophs. So most of the kingdoms of life are heterotrophs, but there are some that are autotrophs, like the plants. An autotroph is an organism that makes its own food. And since a tree is a plant, or the grass that's down here is a plant, that would be something that makes its own food. And there are also bacteria that make their own food, and there's even a thought that aphids, an animal, might be able to do some photosynthesis. So that's an interesting topic to get into. One thing that I want to point out about this graphic that we might not think about if you haven't had ecology is that the sun is the ultimate source of all energy, and the plant harvests or gets the most of that energy usage and is able to make food. The zebra nom-noms on that plant and then gets a little bit, about 10% of the energy from the plant, and then the lion nom-noms on the zebra and gets even less. So it is the most efficient use of energy to be an autotroph. But we like to eat food, so we probably don't want to be autotrophs. So heterotrophs and autotrophs need each other, just like this diagram said. I had a student once who thought that this diagram was saying that the tree was eating the cow, but let's look at it just a little bit more closely, because the tree is not eating the cow. Okay, so the plant produces oxygen, which most of us know that plants give out oxygen, which is why we need to have trees and we shouldn't be cutting our forests down. As animals, we breathe in the oxygen, which allows us to break down our sugar molecules or actually get energy from our food. So you do breathe to stay alive, but the main purpose of taking in oxygen is to break down your food so that you have energy to live. No oxygen, you can't break down any food, you can't live. But that's a process called respiration, and we'll talk about that later. As a waste product, animals breathe out carbon dioxide or CO2, and plants love that because the plants take in that carbon dioxide. Okay, and then they turn that carbon that's in the carbon dioxide, the carbon right there, they're going to turn that into sugar that they'll store in their plant bodies, and when they do that, they'll release oxygen, and the whole cycle starts all over again. Okay, so, wow, I just said okay again. I apologize. Plant cells contain structures called chloroplasts. So inside of a plant cell are many, many, many structures called chloroplasts. Okay, and in that chloroplast, there are some important parts that we'll talk about. There's a membrane, first of all. Okay, and an inner and outer one. We'll see a lot of organelles have double layer membranes to help with movement of substances and to keep things out that shouldn't be in there. There is the stroma, which is the liquid in the center of the chloroplast. There are the granum, which are these little stacks of coins, which are kind of blown up down here. They're not really coins, but they kind of look similar to that, or maybe you think it's a stack of pancakes, but nonetheless, it's a stack. And each of those little discs, so each of these little discs here is called a thylakoid. And then there's actually some space between the thylakoids. And this is where all of the photosynthesis, the action is going to happen, is inside these little chloroplasts. So no chloroplast equals no chlorophyll, or thylakoids, which equals no photosynthesis. So you may remember this from freshman physical science, that plants capture energy from the sunlight, and that energy, or visible light that we can see, is actually made up of many different wavelengths of light. Okay, we've got our visible spectrum down here. So there's a wavelength of energy. It's called the electromagnetic energy, and there's a small little portion of that, just a tiny little portion, that is visible light. That's the light that we're able to see. And within that visible light, there's different colors. So different wavelengths correspond to different colors. You can see, oops, I didn't mean to move that, my bad. You can see that green is at about 550 nanometers, whereas the reds are somewhere between 7 and 750, and the violets and blues are under 500. Okay. So plants have pigments called chlorophyll. There's chlorophyll A and B, and there's actually a chlorophyll F that they've just recently discovered, but we can talk about that later. Inside of that thylakoid. So remember, the thylakoid was the individual stack and individual piece in the stack of granum, and that was inside of the chloroplast. So inside of the plant cell, there are chloroplasts. Inside of the chloroplast, there are granum, which are made up of stacks of thylakoids. Inside of the thylakoids are pigments called chlorophylls. And the main ones that plants have are chlorophyll A and B. And chlorophyll A and B absorb red light, sorry, I keep moving things, and blue light. And they reflect green. So they don't do a very good job of absorbing that 550 nanometer wavelength. So what happens is that they reflect that, so we see plants as green, because we see what they are not absorbing. So if you are wearing a red shirt, it's because your shirt is reflecting red. It's not absorbing the red pigments. Okay, so down here in the blue range and up here in the red range are where the most absorption of light occurs. And you can see from the A and B that chlorophyll A, the blue line, is just a little bit better in the red end. Okay, so chlorophyll A absorbs red better than chlorophyll B, and chlorophyll B absorbs the blues and the violets better than chlorophyll A. So they work together. What happens with this is that if you were growing a plant, you would want to make sure that your plant either has white light, which contains all of the spectrum, or you would want to make sure that you were growing it in a blue light or an orange or red light, but definitely not a green light. Now we're going to go over an overview, of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses the energy of sunlight, okay, that's in yellow there, to convert water that comes in from the roots. Do not say it comes in from the leaves. Plants cannot absorb water from their leaves, so quit watering your plants from their leaves. Water them at the ground. They can't absorb it from their leaves. Okay, anyway, soapbox is done. So they take sunlight and water and carbon dioxide, which comes in through their leaves. Okay, so carbon dioxide comes in through the leaves, water comes in through the roots, sunlight, of course, hits the leaves. That's their main function. And it turns all of that into high energy sugars. Now the equation that we're going to use is going to use glucose. That is not actually correct. Plants don't usually ever make glucose. It's just what is the easiest equation for us to do. Okay, so we will use glucose, but I'm telling you up front, I'm lying to you, and so is your textbook, and so is pretty much every other textbook. But they really don't make glucose, but for the ease of things, we are going to say that they do, okay, because it makes everything nice and pretty and easy to talk about respiration, which is the process that plants and animals use to turn their food into energy, okay? And plants will also produce oxygen in the process of photosynthesis, okay? So if you would like to pause this for a minute so that you can write down, I encourage you in your notes to actually write down in different colors both the words up here and then also the symbols down here so that you can coordinate those in your notes, okay? So we've got carbon dioxide here in red, 6 of them, 6 waters in the presence of sunlight, also chlorophyll. We should put that down there. Chlorophyll inside of a chloroplast because we have to have that, but we need the sunlight. And then that's going to make C6H12O6, which in other words is sugar, okay, and 6 oxygen, okay? So carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll is going to make sugar and oxygen. This is why plants let go of oxygen for us. These sugars that they make are put together and combined to make other carbohydrates for the cell, like cellulose and lignin, which we will talk a little bit more about when we get to plant structure. Okay, I know when I just said okay again. I know this is getting a little long, so I'm trying to go through it, but it is an important process and we are going to spend lots of time on it. So I want to make sure you have a good understanding of what's going on. We're going to do the basics of photosynthesis, so don't get scared. There are some words in here that we're going to use and some symbols, but just kind of make yourself a chart and do the best you can to go through it and try to separate the two processes. Okay, so there's 2 sets of reactions that take place in photosynthesis. The first set of reactions are called the light-dependent reactions. They depend on light. Light is a necessary part of the first set of reactions. The second set of reactions are now called the light-independent reactions. They used to be called the dark reactions when I was in school, but we changed the wording on it because people thought that they had to take place at night, and they don't really need to take place. Oops, I moved that. They don't really need to take place at night. They just do not require light. So here we go with the light-dependent reactions. Okay, so the light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid. Remember, the thylakoids are inside of the chloroplast, and those are those individual stacks, okay? So it occurs in the thylakoid, inside of the chloroplast. It's going to require water. This is why water is necessary for photosynthesis. And actually, oxygen is going to be released during this process. So what's really cool is that plants can take water and they can actually pull it apart using the energy of the sunlight. So they literally take the H2O and they rip the H's and the oxygens apart from each other. And then they can put the 2 oxygens like to combine, so they will come together as O2 and then be released into the environment. And it does involve a capture of light energy in the form of electrons, and that energy is used to make 2 main products. ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which hopefully you know from your vocabulary, and then also NADPH, which is the really long name of something that I can't remember right now. It's like something, whatever. So you do not need to know the name of it, but it's just another chemical that's going to go into the next set of reactions. So in the first set of reactions, again, it's going to require energy and light and release oxygen, and we're going to make ATP and NADPH. So here's just another slide just to tell you what ATP is. Okay, so ATP is the cell's usable energy. It's adenosine and then a little sugar, ribose, and then 3 phosphates. And in between the bonds of each of those phosphates, there's a lot of energy. So we like to store energy in that molecule called ATP. And then NADPH, that long word that I can't really remember, is an electron carrier, which is going to take those electrons from the sunlight and it's going to carry them or transfer them over to the next set of reactions, the light-independent reactions. There's an example of the potato down here and the oven mitt, because the NADP that it starts out as is going to be like your hot mat, your oven mitt, wow. And the potato is the electrons from the sun. So the NADP, your oven mitt, picks up the potato because it's too hot to carry on its own, and it carries it over to the next set of reactions. Okay. Now we get on to the light-independent reactions and the mighty Rubisco, which we probably won't learn too much about. So the light-independent reactions are the second set of reactions that occur during photosynthesis, and these are going to take place in the stroma. Remember that the stroma is the liquid that is inside of the chloroplast. So we've moved out of the thylakoids and we're now in the liquid that's inside of the chloroplast. In the light-independent reactions, this is where we're actually going to get to produce the sugars for photosynthesis. Okay? And that sugar comes from carbon dioxide. So we're actually splitting off that carbon off of the carbon dioxide, and we're going to combine those, and we're going to take those, and we're going to take the water from the first set of reactions, the H's, remember, we split the H2O, and so now we've got carbons, we've got some H's, and we've got some oxygens that we're going to rearrange, and when we put it all back together, we're going to make a sugar. Okay. This whole process is fueled by the things that we created during the first set of reactions, which are the ATP and NADPH. So let's do a quick overview here. So we've got light coming in to the leaf, and it's going to go into the cell, and then it'll go into the chloroplast, which contains the thylakoids, and the thylakoids contain chlorophyll that help absorb the electrons. Okay. Then during those light-dependent reactions, we're going to take water, we're going to split water apart, and we're going to release oxygen. We're going to hang on to those H's from the water. And then during the second set of reactions, we're going to take the carbon dioxide that came in through the leaf, we're going to combine it with water, rearrange everything, and voila, we get sugar. If you're still a little bit confused by this process, please come talk to me. I have some manipulatives that we can kind of go over, like little ball and stick figure things, so you can actually see how carbon dioxide and water are pulled apart and then put back together again to form sugar. So this is the last slide here. So there are some things that affect the amount of photosynthesis that can take place in a plant. And those 3 things are temperature, light intensity, and amount of water. So let's just take a brief moment to discuss each one. So temperature is important because after 0 degrees Celsius, which is freezing, water is in a frozen state. So then, of course, photosynthesis can't happen if the water is ice instead of liquid. Okay? And above 37 degrees, it doesn't really happen very well. They can still do it, but it's not at its optimal point. So 37 degrees is our Celsius is our body temperature. So we're looking at about 98 degrees. So on those 100-degree days in the summer, your poor plants aren't really doing much photosynthesis. They're just like us and trying to survive the heat. Okay. So there is an optimal temperature, and the reason why we have that optimal temperature is because the enzymes that are needed to make photosynthesis happen are only working below that 37 degrees. Okay. The second thing is light intensity, so the brightness of the light. The more light there is, the more photosynthesis that can happen. But you can actually see on this second diagram over here that the rate of photosynthesis will continue to go up, and then we see a flattening out of that curve. And that's because there's only so much photosynthesis that a plant can do. So you can give it more and more and more light, or more and more intense light, but there's only so much that a plant can handle. So then it will just kind of level off, and that's as much as it will do. And then, of course, the other thing that is very important is the amount of water. So we said we take the water and we split water and take the H's off of that. And that's where when we make the C6H12O6, that's the sugar. That's where we get the H's from in the C6H12O6 is from the water. So if there is not enough water, the plants can't obtain the H's that are needed, the hydrogens that are needed to be able to put together the sugars. Okay, I hope that you have a better understanding of photosynthesis. Please continue to ask questions, jot down anything that you may have not understood, and ask me if you don't understand.